All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay, I just have to tell y'all how happy y'all have made me this morning. We have 21 people in class, and we have not had this many people here since the first day of class. So can we just give y'all a round of applause? And I just say that because attendance the past 2 weeks has been dismal. Let's just be honest with ourselves. And I've just been really sad. There's just something different about having, even though, again, this is a weird semester and y'all are like separated by zip-tied chairs, it just feels different to teach with a full classroom and know that y'all made the decision to come to class today. So please hear my appreciation. Thank you. Thank you. You've made my Tuesday a lot better than how it started. So thank y'all for that. So today, we are talking about one thing that seems a little different, but it's actually a continuation of our discussion about motivation. And so, again, if y'all watched the class videos from last week, you were here, we talked about a lot of different theories of motivation, and I can tell y'all we really did surface level stuff when it came to them and knowing the difference and kind of looking at the pros and cons of what those different approaches to motivation, how it can impact what we do as leaders, what we do as teachers, what we do when we're trying to get people to do what we want them to do, and also when we try to understand why people do the things that they do. Because ultimately, that is what motivation is all about. It's not that people lack motivation. It's just that maybe we don't understand why they're choosing to do what they do. Locus of control is a little bit different approach on this idea of motivation. And it's almost more rooted a little bit in psychology and personality. And so, again, if you were drawing like the big concept map of this class, we have motivation that is helping us kind of decide or define a little bit more what exactly influence is and how as leaders we influence other people. It's a little bit connected to power, somewhat in that way. Locus of control is connected both to motivation, but it can also swing back around and touch a little bit on trait theory as far as personality traits and things we look at. And so today my goal is it's not a real content-heavy discussion or even presentation of what locus of control is. It's pretty straightforward. So we're going to go through these slides. We're going to talk about what locus of control is, what it isn't, and then I have another video. We watched a video last week about motivation. We're going to watch another video that's going to help us hopefully make a little bit more sense of what locus of control is. So ultimately, locus of control is this idea. And again, locus, it doesn't have a T on the end, so we're not talking about an insect. Okay? Locus is kind of just another word derived from the same Latin word that we use for location, right? So it's saying, where does our sense of control, where is it located? That's what we're looking at. As an individual human being, we engage with the world, we engage with environment, we engage with other people, and we either have a sense that we're in control of things or we're not in control of things. And for every person, that degree or amount of control is a little bit different. What all can influence our perception of being in control or not? What things in life help you feel in control? That you know what's going on, you know why things are happening the way they are.
Having a to-do list.
A to-do list. So some organization. What else? Good communication. So you feel like if you're not being told what's going on, you don't have a whole lot of control going on in the situation. What else? Transparency. So the amount that you feel like people are being honest and sharing information adequately with you. I won't ask your faith background, but how many of you feel like there's something spiritual that gives you a sense of whether you're in control of things or not? Right? And the amount that maybe you can be or can't be. right? What else? What other things influence whether we feel in control of a situation or not?
The environment we're in.
Okay, how so?
Like when I'm in an environment that I'm not familiar with, I obviously don't feel in control.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm familiar with the situation, you know what it looks like for education, like as students, we know we're in control and we know what our role is.
Yeah, so familiarity is huge, right? That's a huge piece in whether we feel in control. How many of y'all would say just the sense of whether you get to be in charge or not? Yeah. There's some things that I don't mind taking a back seat to, but there are other things that if I'm going to be a part of it, if I don't have a chance to be in charge, I probably don't want to do it, right? If I don't feel like I'm going to be in control of it, just keep me out, okay? So all these different things play into our sense of control. And so it's an indicator of whether locus of control is not just like identifying how much we feel in control of things. It's more so our indication of whether we feel like we have any control or not over the environment and the events that happen to us. So, right, we're us. We have our little bubble, right? But there's a whole world around us happening. There's a lot of other people involved. And so sometimes those things can bump up against our bubble, right? And maybe we want to be standing here in the middle, but a bubble from outside hits me here and knocks me to this side. Locus of control is this idea of either looking at myself and figuring out perhaps how I contributed to my bubble shifting, or looking at the bubble that hit me and saying it's the bubble's fault, and that's what's caused it. Okay? So again, it's how do these external events, how does the external environment affect our ability to have a sense of control of what's going on with us? How this is connected to motivation, I want y'all to think about that. Write that at the top of your paper. How is locus of control connected to motivation? As we learn about what it is, I want y'all to try to figure out that connection because we'll talk about it at the end. There are two types. And again, like I said, locus of control is a pretty simplistic concept. There's not a whole lot to it. It's this idea that as humans, based on our personality, we either have an internal sense of locus of control or we have an external sense of locus of control. Think back a little bit to motivation theory. We talked about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation was this idea that you're going to do things simply because you enjoy them. You don't really need outside factors influencing you to try to be motivated. External, again, was no, I need external motivators to keep me motivated. Internal, external kind of plays the same here. Internal locus of control is this idea that I am in control. If something happens to me, there's a reason, I contributed to it. And this is all based, again, in this idea of expectancy theory. Can anybody, there's another theory we'll talk about later on that's rooted in this idea of expectancy theory. But it's simply this. You have an internal locus of control because you know if you do A, you'll get B. So if I study hard and study I'm not going to say hard. I feel like that's a misconception about exams. If I study adequately and properly for exam 1, I expect to get a good grade, right? Students oftentimes have that expectation. But if you go into a class and you say it doesn't matter how hard I study or how often or in what way, teacher's going to give me a bad grade. That's not internal locus of control, okay? So the idea with internal locus of control is that if you know that there's an action that you need to do to get an outcome that you want, and again, it's the outcome you want, you feel like it's in your control. How many of y'all, when you go to take final exams, you look at what your grade is, you look at how many points, maybe you start doing that mathematical game a little bit of like, well, I can keep my current grade and I'm satisfied with it, and I only need to make a D on the final, right? And that's what you do. Okay, I'm not going to say that's bad motivation. I'm going to say that you want A, so you're doing B. And so you're in control of what grade you get, right? Would you feel that way? Okay, how many of y'all have ever taken a final exam and you say, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm probably going to fail it, and I have no idea what my grade's going to end up in this class? Okay, so you're approaching in that class with an external locus of control. And so external locus of control, this, instead of expectancy theory, it's rooted in this idea of attribution. So whether we realize that we do it or not, when things happen to us, we have a tendency to attribute them to something. And so rather than expectancy theory that says, I want B as my result, that's what I expect, so I'm going to do A. Attribution theory says that when things happen to you, or you have a particular outcome of something, rather than recognizing what you could have done in that situation, you feel like it just was out of your control. You attribute it to external things. So I go back to the exam, the final exam that you said. I walked in and I was like, doesn't matter what I do for the exam, I'm going to fail it and I don't know what grade I'm going to get. You're attributing your grade to the control that you perceive the teacher has on your grade, rather than expecting an outcome based on what you can do. Do y'all see that clear distinction between internal and external locus of control? Okay. So let's talk a little bit more. Now that we kind of know what the two biggies are, let's talk a little bit about the specifics of these two. Internal locus of control. You believe that things that happen around you are because of your actions. If I study for this exam, I'm getting the grade I get based on the amount that I study, not because my teacher just made a hard exam. Okay, that's a difference. What are some other things maybe in your life that you're like, yeah, I can see how my actions played a role in what happened to the events around me?
Maybe like in relationships, like if you like put in a lot of effort, and whether it's like romantic or not, like if you're investing in that, like you expect like the relationship to be good, or like I guess like in a more professional relationship, it's like if you do your job and like communicate and like are clear with like your goals and your tasks, like you expect things to go well.
Absolutely. So maybe you met someone new your freshman year of college, and now 2-3 years later, y'all are just the best of friends, and you're like, how did this happen? But you realize it was because y'all were intentional. You talk to each other often, you plan to do things together, right? It's because of what you did, because of the actions, that you now have this outcome, right? It didn't just kind of happen organically or by magic, okay? You also feel, if you have an internal locus of control, you feel a sense of control in your life. You feel like the decisions you make are going to impact your future, the path you go down. Even when you perhaps have negative consequences versus positive consequences, you realize it's because of perhaps the choices that you made, right? And then finally, your success is a result of your own efforts. What are your thoughts about that last statement? Anybody like, I mean, yeah, kind of, but I don't know that I like how it's said.
I guess it would be like how you would define success.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's whatever you expect, right? Internal locus of control is rooted in expectancy theory, so we're not telling you what to expect. It's just what you do. So your success is determined by that. I'll tell you, for me, it's hard for me to swallow that, but we've got to recognize it's part of this theory. Because I'm like, I can't think of a whole things in my life that I've done on my own. There's always been something else involved. But I guess if I kind of did walk through it, I could say, well, even if I feel like this person helped me along, I guess I let them help me along. I guess I made the choice to get to know that person. I made the choice, there's pieces. I still feel like there's something bigger that's a part of a lot of my successes, but that's my own perception. But that's just, again, a way for y'all to kind of look at these things critically. You don't have to take everything as the law, right? But to just kind of look at these and say, I like all these pieces, but that one kind of, I don't know. That's just for me, particularly with internal locus of control. So here's how you could, if you wanted to figure out, do people have an internal or external locus of control? Here are some pretty common characteristics of people with an internal locus of control. They take risks. Why do you think people with an internal locus of control might be more willing to take risks?
Because they feel like they're in control of the outcome. I think that's the easiest way to say it.
Yeah. They've probably already thought through consequences, right? And again, we tend to have this negative connotation with consequences, but everything we do has a consequence. It's just a matter of whether it's a negative or a positive one, right? And so they kind of have already done that risk assessment usually. And so they're willing to have whatever outcomes are out there, those options. And so they feel like it is their choice that they're making to engage in whatever that particular action or behavior is. They're more proactive, less anxious. They set harder goals for themselves. Thinking about those three things, why do you think that describes someone with an internal locus of control? More proactive, less anxious, set harder goals.
I just feel like that kind of defines a person that's in control. I mean, why are you anxious when you feel in control, and then you set the goals because you know how hard you're going to work and you know what your expectation is of those outcomes.
Exactly, expectations. Again, that expectancy theory. You're going to do this because you expect this, right? And so they're willing to kind of set those harder goals for themselves because they feel like they can be in control of how much they engage, again, the choices that they make, the behavior that they have. Why are people with an internal locus of control less conforming to authority and tend to be more ethical? I am the master of my own ship. You heard that before? So they're less willing to kind of just take authority's direction for sake of wanting direction because they feel like they have internal direction themselves, internal control. And so, yeah, I would say this is, and again, you could think this is good or bad or indifferent, but people with an internal locus of control are more likely going to question direction from authority. They're going to want to provide their own input to maybe those decisions. They don't so much appreciate being told just what to do because it may not align with their expectations, right? And why might they tend to be more ethical?
Probably rule followers, like wanting to do the right thing.
Rule followers want to do the right thing. Think about, too, a person with internal locus of control that knows what they want, and so they've made decisions on how to get there. They value that so much that sometimes they'll say, well, who am I to tell other people what to do? And so there is this sense of valuing other individuals that tends to lead them to be or behave perhaps more in an ethical manner that considers those values of other people. Okay, a little bit more about internal locus of control. And so these are things that matter perhaps on the job that as leaders or managers we might look at and think are important. We want our employees to have internal locus of control because they're going to take better care of stuff, right? They tend to be more satisfied with their jobs. And we know that they're more not only cooperative, so they work well with other people, but they're also more self-reliant. So Again, these types of employees aren't ones that you've got to micromanage and tell them what to do. They're pretty used to like figuring out what needs to go on. They can kind of think ahead and say, oh, I've done this before. These are the 5 steps. I don't need to be told what to do every step along the way. They like taking on more responsibility. And also these people, again, because they tend to appreciate risk and take more risks, they also are willing to adopt innovations a lot quicker. Okay. They don't think the man's out to get them. Okay. Because they realize they're in control of what happens to them. So here's the opposite end of the spectrum, people with an external locus of control. These people don't perceive a high degree of control over their lives. Again, they attribute what happens to them to external things, right? So they're going to say, well, I didn't get into this college. Maybe not because of what their high school GPA was, but maybe it was because that college just didn't like people from where they came from. I don't know. So a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, this just happened to me because of luck or misfortune, right? So the opposite of luck. They'll say that, well, powerful people, it's the people in charge, it's their fault. So it's the professor's fault I failed this grade. It's my mom and dad's fault that I didn't get the opportunities that I wanted. It was fate. So in a sense, like, the universe is just happening and I don't play a part in it. I just let it happen to me and I move along. And this is interesting, religious belief. So how extreme someone kind of takes that viewpoint of faith and fate can also play into that external locus of control. Right? Something I want to point out though here about this. So again, I know a lot of y'all perhaps in the future are going to be working in K-12 systems as teachers, or you might do some type of informal teaching or some type of youth development moving forward. Are there children who have very high external locus of control? Why might that be?
Probably because they're kids. Like, you're still like with your family, being raised by your family. There's not much you can control. Like, I mean, think about like when you turn 16 and get your license. It's like your first taste of freedom if you are able to like have a car. So there's not much, like, many decisions that you can make for yourself.
Yeah. So just as a child in general, there's a lot of things you're just not in control of, right? You can't control the salary that your parents make, which can't control the SES status that you perhaps were raised in. You can't control the systematic discrimination perhaps that your generations have occurred to you. And so the situation you've ended up in, again, so there's a lot of things that can contribute to a child's external locus of control that it's important for us to understand. They genuinely are things they can't control. And so it shapes their world into thinking that a lot of this is what happens to them. Bill and Penny, for several years, fostered children. And they talked a lot about this, about having that experience with kids that they were fostering and just knowing right away, what do we do? How do we help these kids who have an external locus of control that, you know, they're not used to having food on their table all the time and it was always their mom's fault, right? Or they were abused and these things happened to them because powerful people took advantage of them, right? We're not saying external and internal, one's good and one's bad. This is a tool to help us acknowledge where people may be at, to meet them where they are. And so, yeah, you know, that's one reason why with kids who perhaps are in the system or things like that, maybe they have a hard time with school because they've never really had an example in their life where they had an expectation for something, they put in the work to do it and they got it because there was too much externally going on in their lives that impacted that. So we do need to recognize, again, that this is some people's reality and what happens. So some things about external locus of control. These people, because again, they believe everything happens to them out of luck, out of fate, they attribute it to external things. These people tend to express unrealistic occupational aspirations. Anybody else in here other than me start out as a pre-vet major in college? I see that. Yeah. Okay. I look back on my life now and I realized that was an unrealistic occupational aspiration for myself. And perhaps I thought it would just happen to me because I had an uncle who was a vet, and just, yeah, if I have an uncle that's a vet, I'm going to be a vet, right? But then, I took organic chem too and realized that I just thought my professor was awful, so I quit and changed my major, okay? Definitely a point in my time where I exhibited external locus of control. But why do you think people with external locus of control tend to have these unrealistic aspirations? If they attribute what happens to them to external things rather than what they expect and what they do to receive those expectations, why might they have unrealistic aspirations?
Maybe they don't actually know the work that goes into achieving those goals.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a whole game plan, I guess.
If they think things happen because of luck, they just might feel super lucky all the time, right? So the first place that I taught, it was a small Christian university in Florida, and I was part of the ag program there, and I had a lot of students though in a freshman orientation class. And I remember I had this one boy that he was there on scholarship to play on the basketball team. What do you think his occupational aspiration was? He was going to the NBA. And I was like, dude, you're not a Dennis Rodman. You're not a Scottie Pippen. I don't think. And again, our conference that our university played in, I can't even remember the name of it. It's so tiny. The odds of him going into the NBA are a 2% chance, I think, something like that. Again, I could kind of immediately say, okay, I think I have a student in my class with an external locus of control. He just thought he was going to get lucky and get into it, okay? External locus of control, less able to cope with reality. So these are individuals that when things do happen to them and it wasn't the luck or the fate that they expected, they can't see past what role they played into it. It's always somebody else's fault, and that's the only way they know how to cope with reality. Anybody have examples of that?
Middle child syndrome.
Don't be hating on us middle children. No, talk to me about middle child syndrome.
It's always somebody else's fault. It's because the older one did this or the younger one's the baby, so he gets this treatment. It's never because the middle one acts up.
It was never my fault. I'm a middle child. It was never my fault. I was never sassy with my siblings. It was just because my older brother was mean, or my sister is a snob, or, right? I could agree with you on that one. What other examples might you have of not being able to cope with reality and how these people might react to that?
I guess going off the children aspect, just spoiled brats that get whatever they want. They don't have to work for it. Mom, they find a new interest, and mom and dad are oh, okay, I'll buy you all the equipment and everything that goes along with this, and you can do that, and then they give up on it in a month because they're oh, it's hard.
Yeah.
Oh.
I wish, now that I think about it, I should have saved this video clip. So my family, a big tradition, I don't know if you call it a tradition, just kind of happened. Every Sunday night we watch America's Funniest Home Videos. It's good, clean fun. My 4-year-old likes it. He calls it Funny People. We watch Funny People all the time. And the other day I saw one on there that a dad was videotaping his little daughter, and she had lipstick all over her face. And they're like, Lily, what happened? And she pulls out a teddy bear and she says, Teddy told me to do it. And it's like, oh my gosh, that young, that's how they come to the reality, right? She knew she did something she wasn't supposed to do, but she couldn't just say, I drew on my face with lipstick. But Teddy said to get the colors. Teddy said to draw a flower on my face. Teddy said, you know, and I was just like, what a good example of attribution theory, okay? Third thing about people with the external locus of control, they're more likely, and again, this is that connection to power and power bases, to use coercive power and threats. So for someone who says, things happen to me because of external factors, I'm not in control of it, why, if they're in a leadership position, would they be more likely to use coercive power? Because it's the first time or the only little bit of control they think they have. So for someone who doesn't feel like they're in control of what happens to them, that it's always other people's fault, their inclination is always to blame others, they're also the type of leader who's more likely to use that coercive power and be that powerful person. I wouldn't say it's so much because of revenge. It's nothing like that. But again, think, if you have felt completely out of your control of your life for a long time and you get into an assumed authority position, you're going to take control as much as you think you possibly can. And so, does coercive power work for individuals? What do we know about coercive power?
It's a short term.
Very short term. Are people more likely to commit, comply, or resist what you're asking them to do? Resist. Okay? So again, I asked you all to think about motivation. Before we get to the link to motivation, here's the link to leadership. People with an internal locus of control naturally are going to emerge as group leaders. It's kind of just one of those things that happen. And those groups, there is a benefit to that, right? So you don't want to necessarily form a group and say, who here thinks they have an internal locus of control? Okay, you're the group leader. No, we just kind of know from research, again, that organically, those are the people who kind of get chosen to put into leadership positions, or they just emerge as the person kind of heading these groups. And those groups over time do perform better. They also are more future oriented. So when we think back to traits of leadership, you know, one thing that we do like is forward thinking. We want leaders who are forward thinking. And because people with an internal or internals tend to take more risk, be more proactive, adopt innovations quicker, these are the same individuals who tend to be more forward thinking or future oriented. Okay. So we've got to know how it's developed. I said that it's connected a lot to this idea of your personality. And so if we think back to when we talked about personality and trait theory, I told you, you know, there's some part of our personality that we are born with, but personality theory in and of itself will say who you are now, currently, may not be exactly the innate personality you were born with, because external factors, the environment, what have you, those things are bumping up against you, and they may shift you different ways, okay? And so just the same, people's internal, external locus of control, where they fall on that scale, has a lot to do with how they were raised as kids. All right, so that's, again, another reason why children, depending on the environment that they're raised in, can exhibit very high levels of external locus of control. These children, when we look and have studied children, and kind of those commonalities between them, those who have that, exhibit that external behavior, they live in a home that has a lot of physical punishment. They aren't allowed a lot of privileges, or they're overprotected. Huh?
That's a blessing.
Oh, okay, there you go. So it's interesting. It's not just kind of, again, it's not just the negative side of things. If you have a parent that was very overprotected, then you kind of are raised with this sense of like the world's going to happen to you, so you need to be protected. So that kind of creates that external locus of control. On the other hand, for internals, predictive standards. So your parent asks you to do something. If you do your chores, you're going to be able to play outside. But if you don't do them, you go to timeout. Like consistency, I think, is probably a good word here. So raised with a lot of consistency and those expectations. Discipline, principled discipline. Okay, we won't get into debate of whether whoopings are a good thing. How many of y'all got whoopings as a kid? Who here thinks you'll give whoopings to your child? Okay, so we'll just put that out in the open. I'm not. But there is, would y'all agree, there's a difference between what they call principled discipline and physical punishment? Yeah, big difference. And their home as a whole was warm and pretty democratic. Now, you don't want a 2-year-old negotiating with you. That's like negotiating with terrorists, okay? That's what me and my husband say. We do not negotiate with terrorists. Sorry.
That's awesome.
That's we literally look at our child and we're like, no, you're a terrorist. We're not negotiating with you. Don't follow my parenting tips. They're not good. But there are some things as a kid you can be democratic in, right? So what are some things, and again, democratic is this idea of letting people be a part of the decision-making process. For any of y'all, were there things that your parents let you be a part of the decision-making process?
No.
No? Yeah. What type of pizza did you order for dinner one night? Did they ever get your input on that? No?
Oh, yes.
I mean, yeah. Anybody's parents ever let them paint their room or decorate their room how they want?
No.
No?
They should have vetoed that, I'll say it. I think it's a terrible design.
My parents did not let us decorate our room, and I had this horrendous pink carpet. Like my mom just thought, me and my sister were 2 years apart, and they thought that everything we had to match, and it was just awful. I wish my parents would have let us do that. But maybe pick where you go to eat for dinner. There's little things that, again, age appropriate, families can let kids be a part of, that they start to realize, like, hey, I have some agency. That's the thing. If you help kids young in life develop a sense of agency, they're more than likely going to grow up with more of an internal locus of control. So again, you think about that, any of y'all that may work with youth, how do you approach your classroom? How do you approach the workshop that you're doing? How do you approach the class you're teaching?
I know, I find a way to like give students like a sense of like confidence and like, whoa, I can like kind of talk to her. It's like, hey, is it okay if we start with this today, or would you guys rather blah, blah, blah? Or like, I don't know, asking them questions about themselves, but like allowing them to have opinions, I think.
Right.
Like, I don't know, my parents, like, we had a strong say, like, if we wanted to go on vacation, like, where we could stop, or like, what we should do for dinner, or if we want this, we should pick it ourselves. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, I turned out okay. I'm not.
Or so you think.
I don't know, a little weird, but it works out.
Right? But again, this applies in all aspects of life. And this is, again, if you have people around you with an external locus of control, one way that you can kind of start shifting, because kind of the unique thing about this theory is the idea that people aren't stuck where they're at. It's not a stagnant thing. They can develop over time. One of the first things you can do as a leader is to say, well, how can I give this person more agency? How can I help them see that they can be a part of the decision-making process, that their choices matter, and that depending on what they choose, they can get the outcome they want or not. So you start providing those examples for them to be successful in that way. Okay? Also need to realize too, that there are individuals with certain disabilities that, because of perhaps what the level of that disability is, may determine their amount of locus of control. Okay? And there's no clear delineator there, and we need to realize there are some disabilities that people have that we don't see, that aren't physical, right? And so I think the thing to understand with this theory too is that we need to approach people with a sense of grace, okay? And not put a label on them as good or bad, depending on their locus of control, but again, meet them where they're at. And then also we need to understand social discrimination. So there are systematic social structures that we have that make it hard for different groups, underrepresented groups, you name it, to be able to have that sense of agency fully. So research has shown over time that women tend to be more externals, whereas men tend to be more internals. I wonder if this research would update, if that's starting to shift a little bit, because we are seeing a more shift of women having a voice in the workplace, having agency, asking for more equality, what have you. But again, kind of historically over time, the social structure hasn't really existed in a way where women could have that full agency, could really say, well, if I do this work, I'm going to get paid this. Research still shows women only get paid 76 cents for every dollar a man makes at the same job. So those are some of the contributing factors that we have to look at there. This occurs with racial groups. This occurs with groups with disabilities, you name it. So any underrepresented or marginalized group is perhaps going to be or have more of an external locus of control. And so, can we change it? Yes. We've kind of just said, how is it developed? That means we learn it. We learn whether to be an internal or an external. So if it can be learned, it can be changed, right? But here's the thing, people have to want to change, right? And again, I believe that first step is helping people identify where there needs to be change, and then helping them identify what aspects of their life can they start to develop more agency. Why might it be easier though? So we always think of change of like, oh, we must want an external to become an internal. But it is possible for an internal to become an external. And that's been shown over time to be easier. Why is it easier for a person with a high level of internal locus of control to change over time to somebody with an external locus of control? Why might that be the easier shift?
I don't know. I don't want to think of them as like good and bad because I don't know why I tend to do that with like Elizabeth theories and stuff.
Because we're human.
Yeah, yeah. They're all like equal in their own way. But I think like over time, if that internal person isn't like accomplishing those goals, or they just keep feeling defeated, even though they think it's in their control, it switches to that external. Like they want to find a reason why they aren't doing as well as they want to. Maybe. Is that?
A lot of it can have to do with like, again, I go back to this idea of systematic structures. So one thing that happens a lot with young people entering the workforce is that maybe you've always had an internal locus of control. You've been told, if I work hard in college, I'm going to get a good job. And then you go to the career fair, you do all the things, right? And you don't get a job offer. Or you have to take a job that is absolutely nothing like what you want. Can feel kind of defeating, right? Because you were told, if you do this, you can expect this. And then it didn't happen, right? That can be a little defeating. And so it's much easier than to shift into, well, what else? It must have been COVID's fault. I think everything's going to get blamed on COVID in the next year. It's the economy's fault. It's this fault. It's the president's fault. It's the, right? We could probably come up with a list of 15 different things that could be influencing whether someone gets a job or not. Could some of those things be true? Yeah. Legitimately, yeah. But again, it's that sense of, are you going to attribute your success to that? Or are you going to say, there's still something else I could do? Could you view then instead the job that you have to take as, this is just what I've got to do right now, and it's just another part of my stepping stone to getting what I expect. So you have to have that mind shift a little bit. Okay? And then lastly, you need to reinforce specific reward systems and personal success. So if you are, and this is for those individuals that you're wanting to help shift from an external to an internal, you've got to be specific, reinforce, and I would say be consistent with those things. Because again, you're wanting to help these individuals develop a sense of agency. And so they need to see that the actions and the behaviors that they engage in are going to lead to the outcome that they expect. And so if you don't provide a space or a situation where that truly happens, you're actually going to be reinforcing that external locus of control rather than helping them develop internal locus of control. Clear as mud? Look at y'all's own scores. So you should have brought with you today the results of this scale, the locus of control scale. Okay. So there were, as a whole, 29 items, right? And you were to choose, in that item, there's a pair of statements. You were to choose which statement you most agreed with kind of represents you and how you approach things. Now that you know a little bit about internal and external locus of control, what do you think those two statements were in each item? One represented internal, one represented external. And so what you were asked to do is, depending on these specific items down here at the bottom, if you selected that item, you were to give yourself a point, or you were to count that number, okay? So let's look real quick at and let's just take the first three items. So 2A, 3B, and 4B. Let's see what we can point out here about them. So 2A. A is people often succeed because they are in the right place at the right time. Or B, success is mostly dependent on hard work and ability. A represents which type of person? An external. In the right place at the right time. It's that idea of luck or fate. Success on hard work and ability, it's again what actions you engage in, so that would be internal. Okay, 3. You either have A, when things go wrong in my life, it's generally because I have made mistakes. Internal or external? Internal. B, misfortunes occur in my life regardless of what I do. Some days I feel like this. B, that would be external, right? So again, this is something you can use this scale to help you understand. Yes?
Okay, you just read 3, right?
Number 3? Yes.
That's not what our number 3 is. Yeah.
What is your number 3?
There was 2 different ones on there. Like the one that was supposed to be submitted was like this one,
Uh-huh.
and then there was another one in our module.
No, I'm real glad I wasn't the
That's
only
what
one
my
that
number-
not reading what she was reading.
My number 3 says this.
Mine absolutely does not.
One of the major reasons why we
Yeah.
have wars is because people don't take enough interest in politics.
Oh, that's a question though. But it's like, wait,
We did, yeah, you just did on that one. It's like a
Ours is yeah.
yeah.
That one.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be the same concept. So let's just go with this one, okay? Nope, we're good. Because you see, scoring is pretty similar here. So let's do 2A, 3B, 4B. Thank y'all for letting me know that. I assumed that both were in there, or the same one. So, okay, 3. A would be one of the major reasons why we have wars is because people don't take enough interest in politics. Internal or external? Okay, internal. There will always be wars, no matter how hard people try to prevent them. External. That's just kind of like we have no impact on what's going on. Okay, 4. A, in the long run, people get the respect they deserve in this world. Let's look at B. Unfortunately, an individual's worth often passes unrecognized no matter how hard he tries. That one's external. A, again, you want to think about internal has to do with what you expect. External has to do with attributing. And so A says that in the long run, people get the respect they deserve. So you're expecting that it may not happen right now, That's eventually going to happen. So I may not get recognized for all the awards right now in my job, but by the time I die, somebody will probably say I did a good job. Okay? That's kind of an extreme response. All right, so you add up between all of those the point that you scored. I'm not going to ask y'all what you scored, but there should have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Nobody had a score higher than 23? Right? So let's just say here, for a matter of if you scored between 15 and 23, you probably have a high level of external locus of control. If you scored between a 1 and 5, you probably have a high level of internal locus of control. But if you're between a 5 and 15, you're somewhere in the middle, okay? How do you feel like your results accurately represent you? Or not? Maybe you're like, I was completely surprised by my results.
I think it's interesting because I do believe a lot of what I do is what attributes my success. But I also grew up doing a lot of judge subjective sports and events. And so at the end of the day, I'm putting my hard work into the opinion of somebody else. And I've had to learn to be okay with that. So I guess there is part of me that's just like, it doesn't really matter how hard I work, because at the end of the day, somebody else is in control of that, and that's just something I've chosen to do, but it does affect kind of my viewpoint on other things, even if it's not being judged.
So that's a great example, again, of kind of those environmental factors that can influence our personality development. And I never really thought about that before, that like, yeah, if you're involved in athletics or any type of event where there's a judge, right, that you know, you can't control what they think is good or bad, or the perfect form of public speaking, or whatever, right? You do kind of get this sense of like, I do have to realize there are some things I'm not in control of. So that's a really good example. Anybody else?
I think it's kind of interesting, like there's some ways I'm like, man, I'm the most internal person I've ever met. But there's other questions in there, it's like, what's your astronomical sign influence your life decision? And I'm like, there's a little hippie in me. I'm like, all right, I'll check it once in a while. Let's see, I'm a Cancer. Woo. So, I don't know. We all look at it, like, if it pops up on Instagram, you're going to say, oh, I'm this. I don't know. I'm like dead in the middle, so I think that it's pretty accurate to what I am.
Yeah, that's a good example. Horoscopes are definitely one of those things that we're like, and there seems to be nuggets of truth sometimes to that stuff, right? That you're like, oh, I just need my stars to align, right? Or however all that works. Okay.
I had a hard time even taking the quiz because I was like, these are two extremities. Like, especially the one about war, I was like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I scored like a 13, and I was like, yeah, that's pretty solid. Because there's, like, I'm not futuristic at all. Like, I'm very living in the moment, day to day, wake up and wing it kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
But
I could see that.
Also, like, I can be a planner, and, like, I try to, like, do a good job to, like, get good things. But I'm very, like, go with the flow, everything happens for a reason kind of gal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's a good point. And it's interesting what you said about these being two extremities and being uncomfortable with that. This is just an interesting paradox that I see with humans as a whole. The more I deal with them and the older I'm getting, is that when we're faced with an either or argument, we don't like it, but yet oftentimes that's where we always go, right? So like when you have to make the choice between this or this, when you're faced with that, we don't like it. But when we are just talking about things, we tend to create life to either be this is the answer or this is the answer. And again, it's just another good example that like everything really exists in more of this muddy middle of where things are at.
I think people find like comfort in that. It's like right or wrong, but is there really ever, yeah.
Well, our brains are designed. So like the whole purpose of our brains is to make sense out of things and to make complex things more simple for us to understand. And so we do it naturally. And so that's where we just, with our learning, we have to step in and say, no, there's not just two options oftentimes, right? Any other thoughts about your score?
So I was in the middle, and I'm one of those people, like, I don't know, just kind of brought to light some things, but like, I like to be in control of my life and like all the things that are happening. But whenever I get like stressed out and overwhelmed, that's whenever I like feel like I'm losing control, and that's where that external comes in.
Yeah. I know that there's no way I can be high on the internal locus of control because I suffer from anxiety. So when it was like, these people are less anxious, and like, there goes my, like, again, the external part of me was like, there goes my chances to ever do it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's right. You kind of, and again, it's not good or bad. You know, for me too, even in my results, when I take this, I fall somewhere in the middle. And I know part of that reason is because of my faith background, that I'm okay not being in control of some things, just depending on how I was raised in that particular faith space. And so you can acknowledge those things, but there are areas in my life that I can look at that I can see my natural tendency to want to attribute the result to something external, but I've had to kind of train myself to stop and think, no, what part did I play in this, right? Or what choice did I make? And that to me has helped me have a little bit more of that internal locus of control.
Do you think like sense of control can maybe, because like people are more like relational oriented and like, I guess like with the clips and strengths, there's like the 4 different spectrums.
Uh-huh.
Do you think if you're like more task oriented and like like the proactive word was used earlier, but like if you're more of those types of things, you might be more internal, and then like if you're relational, you might be more external? Like, do you think those are connected or maybe not?
So that's a really good question. Any of the research has been done that shows there's not a direct correlation there. So there isn't a strong relationship between, like, say, personality type or behavior style. So that's what task and relationship are, is that behavior style. But what it has shown us, because again, like it's across the map. We have people who are task oriented, who some are high externals and some are high internals. Again, more of the correlation that exists is in that development stage. So those environmental factors that are influencing. So how you were raised as a child, all of those types of things seem to have more of an impact. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Let's watch this real quick. We may not get through the whole thing. It is posted in Canvas for us, but I want us to kind of debrief. Listen through this video and see what you can pick out and things that he says specifically talking about locus of control.
Give a speech or have a meeting where somebody doesn't ask me the millennial question. What's the millennial question? Apparently millennials as a generation, which is a group of people who were born approximately 1984 and after, are tough to manage. And they're accused of being entitled and narcissistic, self-interested, unfocused, lazy. So entitled is a big one. And because they confound leadership so much, what's happening is leaders are asking the millennials, what do you want? And millennials are saying, we want to work in a place with purpose, love that. We want to make an impact, whatever that means. We want free food and beanbags. And so somebody articulates some sort of purpose, there's lots of free food and there's beanbags, and yet for some reason they're still not happy. And that's because they're missing, there's a missing piece. What I've learned is that I can break it down into 4 pieces, right? There are four things, 4 characteristics. One is parenting, the other one is technology, third is impatience, and the 4th is environment. The generation that we call the millennials, too many of them grew up subject to, not my words, failed parenting strategies, where, for example, they were told that they were special all the time. They were told that they could have anything they wanted in life, just because they wanted it, right? They were told, some of them got into honors classes, not because they deserved it, but because their parents complained. And some of them got A's not because they earned them, but because the teachers didn't want to deal with the parents. Some kids got participation medals. You got a medal for coming in last, right? Which the science we know is pretty clear, which is it devalues the medal and the reward for those who actually work hard. And that actually makes the person who comes in last feel embarrassed because they know they didn't deserve it, so it actually makes them feel worse, right? So you take this group of people, and they graduate school, and they get a job, and they're thrust into the real world, and in an instant, they find they're not special, their moms can't get them a promotion, that you get nothing for coming in last, and by the way, you can't just have it because you want it, right? And in an instant, their entire self-image is shattered. And so you have an entire generation that's growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations. The other problem, to compound it, is we're growing up in a Facebook, Instagram world. In other words, we're good at putting filters on things. We're good at showing people that life is amazing even though I'm depressed, right? And so everybody sounds tough, and everybody sounds like they got it all figured out. And the reality is there's very little toughness, and most people don't have it figured out. And so when the more senior people say, well, what should we do? They sound like, this is what you gotta do. And they have no clue. So you have an entire generation growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations, right? Through no fault of their own, right? They were dealt a bad hand, right? Now let's add in technology. We know that engagement with social media and our cell phones releases a chemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good, right? So, we've all had it. You're feeling a little bit down or feeling a little lonely, and so you send out 10 texts to 10 friends, hi, 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 hi. Because it feels good when you get a response, right? Right? It's why we count the likes. It's why we go back 10 times to see if my Instagram is going slower, did I do something wrong? Did they not like me anymore, right? The trauma for young kids to be unfriended. Because we know when you get it, you get a hit of dopamine, which feels good. It's why we like it. It's why we keep going back to it. Dopamine is the exact same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink, and when we gamble. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive, right? We have age restrictions on smoking, gambling, and alcohol, and we have no age restrictions on social media and cell phones, which is the equivalent of opening up the liquor cabinet and saying to our teenagers, hey, by the way, this adolescence thing, if it gets you down. But that's basically what's happening. That's basically what's happening, right? That's basically what happened. You have an entire generation that has access to an addictive, numbing chemical called dopamine through social media and cell phones as they're going through the high stress of adolescence. Why is this important? Almost every alcoholic discovered alcohol when they were teenagers. When we're very, very young, the only approval we need is the approval of our parents. And as we go through adolescence, we make this transition where we now need the approval of our peers. Very frustrating for our parents, very important for us. It allows us to acculturate outside of our immediate families into the broader tribe, right? It's a highly, highly stressful and anxious period of our lives, and we're supposed to learn to rely on our friends. Some people, quite by accident, discover alcohol and numbing effects of dopamine to help them cope with the stresses and anxieties of adolescence. Unfortunately, that becomes hardwired in their brains, and for the rest of their lives, when they suffer significant stress, they will not turn to a person, they will turn to the bottle. Social stress, financial stress, career stress, that's pretty much the primary reasons why an alcoholic drinks, right? What's happening is because we're allowing unfettered access to these dopamine-producing devices and media, basically it's becoming hardwired, and what we're seeing is as they grow older, too many kids don't know how to form deep, meaningful relationships. Their words, not mine. They will admit that many of their friendships are superficial. They will admit that their friends, that they don't count on their friends, they don't rely on their friends, they have fun with their friends, but they also know that their friends will cancel off them when something better comes along. Deep, meaningful relationships are not there because they never practice the skill set, and worse, they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with stress. So when significant stress starts to show up in their lives, they're not turning to a person, they're turning to a device, they're turning to social media, they're turning to these things which offer temporary relief. We know, the science is clear, we know that people who spend more time on Facebook suffer higher rates of depression than people who spend less time on Facebook, right? These things balance. Alcohol is not bad, too much alcohol is bad. Gambling is fun, too much gambling is dangerous, right? There's nothing wrong with social media and cell phones. It's the imbalance, right? If you're sitting at dinner with your friends and you're texting somebody who's not there, that's a problem. That's an addiction. If you're sitting in a meeting with people you're supposed to be listening to and speaking, and you put your phone on the table, face up or face down, I don't care, that sends a subconscious message to the room that you're just not that important to me right now, right? That's what happens. And the fact that you cannot put it away is because you are addicted. Right? If you wake up and you check your phone before you say good morning to your girlfriend, boyfriend, or spouse, you have an addiction. And like all addiction, in time, it'll destroy relationships, it'll cost time, it'll cost money, and it'll make your life worse. Right? So you have a generation growing up with lower self-esteem that doesn't have the coping mechanisms to deal with stress. Right? Now you add in the sense of impatience. Right? They've grown up in a world of instant gratification. You want to buy something, you go on Amazon, it arrives the next day. You want to watch a movie? Log on and watch a movie. You don't check movie times. You want to watch a TV show? Binge. You don't even have to wait week to week to week. Right? I know people who skip seasons just so they can binge at the end of the season. Right?
What?
Instant gratification. You want to go on a date? You don't even have to learn how to be like, hey. You don't even have to learn and practice that skill. You don't have to be the uncomfortable one who says yes when you mean no, and says no when you mean no, but yes when you don't have to swipe right. Bang, I'm a stud. Right? You don't have to learn the social coping mechanisms. Right? Everything you want, you can have instantaneously. Everything you want, instant gratification. Sex, job satisfaction, and strength in relationships, there ain't no after that. They're slow, meandering, uncomfortable, messy processes. I keep meeting these wonderful, fantastic, idealistic, hardworking, smart kids. They've just graduated school. They're in their entry-level job. I sit down with them and I go, how's it going? They go, I think I'm going to quit. I'm like, why? They're like, I'm not making an impact. I'm like, you've been here 8 months. You know? It's as if they're standing at the foot of a mountain and they have this abstract concept called impact that they want to have in the world, which is the summit. What they don't see is the mountain. I don't care if you go up the mountain quickly or slowly, but there's still a mountain. And so what this young generation needs to learn is patience. That some things that really, really matter, like love, or job fulfillment, joy, love of life, self-confidence, a skill set, any of these things, all of these things take time. Sometimes you can expedite pieces of it, but the overall journey is arduous and long and difficult. And if you don't ask for help and learn that skill set, you will fall off the mountain. Or you will, the worst case scenario, and we're already seeing it, the worst case scenario is we're seeing an increase in suicide rates, we're seeing an increase in this generation, we're seeing an increase in accidental deaths due to drug overdoses, we're seeing more and more kids drop out of school or take leaves of absence due to depression. Unheard of. This is really bad. The best case scenario, those are all bad cases, right? The best case scenario is you'll have an entire population growing up and going through life and just never really finding joy. They'll never really find deep fulfillment in work or in life. They'll just waft through life and it'll be just, it's fine. How's your job? It's fine. The same as yesterday. How's your relationship? It's fine. Like that's the best case scenario.
All right, so there's still 5 minutes left, so I encourage y'all to finish watching it in Canvas, but I do want to ask what y'all's first reactions to the video.
This guy looks just like my fiance, so I'm kind of distracted. Yeah, wow. A lot of wow.
Similarities? Other thoughts about the video?
Wow, what he's talking about, not just the love. I'm sorry.
Feel like what he's talking about is true, not true?
I think he hits it hardcore.
Yeah. So it's called the millennial question. He's not referring to just the millennial generation. So we do, typically y'all are Gen Z. I'm a millennial, but what he's saying, the millennial question, is more of like people raised early, right before 2000s and after. So that would include millennials and Gen Zs. And so he's talking about just kind of like these differences. What are some of those things that you feel like he hit nail on the head?
And I guess the whole alcohol thing, and I know it's like, I think it's a big agricultural thing, like a lot of the ag people drink, but like, I think our generation has a severe drinking issue. And I do know a lot of those characteristics because we don't feel comfortable in asking for help. Like, it is the drugs and the alcohol that we are turning to.
Yeah, so it's interesting to know about him. He's not just some person that's like sitting here talking because he feels like talking about this. He's actually Dr. Simon Sinek. So he is a psychologist at Harvard, does a lot of really good research, and happens to be one of the few researchers who's also a really good speaker and can take the stuff he researches and talk to us about it in a way that we understand. So I appreciate that about him. He also wrote a book that's called Start With Why. And again, it's all based on a lot of his research that he's done in psychology. But yeah, based off of what he says, like our generations, instead of learning how to turn to other people to help us learn how to cope with things, we've turned to other aspects to cope. Definitely signs of an external locus of control, right? Any connections that y'all saw between things we talked about, internals versus externals, and maybe some things he pointed out?
The way the kids are raised, so you can have anything just because you want it and get into a job and they realize it's just not realistic.
Yeah,
It's a very external.
yeah.
This whole idea of like the impact, we want to have an impact, we all want to like be the hero, I guess. I think that's just really interesting, like the whole mountain analogy he had. I see that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't really talk about the how we're going to do things. Yeah, you can talk about goal setting all day, but the work and time it's going to take,
Yeah.
that was cool to see that illustrated.
Yeah. So I think too, he talks a lot about kind of what our generations have gone through and how we were raised. And again, our parents are probably going to be on varying levels or degrees of what it is. But when you take everybody's kind of child rearing for our generations and aggregate it together, kind of what he said is the result of what's happened. How many of y'all got a participation trophy? Again, you may not agree with them, but you got one.
I really like the middle. So like, I started out whenever I first started, like we didn't have participation, but like towards like my senior year we started. But I saw a lot of people not take them.
Mm-hmm. So, we think about participation, a lot of it gets associated with sports of like, oh, you're on the T-ball team and everybody gets a trophy, but we do it in livestock judging too, don't we? Yeah. Like you got your blue ribbon, your red ribbon, but then white, down the line. We do it there too. But what he points out that connects with what we've said as well is the impact environment has on our development of this. He even says this. This is what it was like for these generations to grow up, no fault of their own. And so I want you to say he's not blaming us for how we are, right? It's okay to look back and say, and what that should hopefully do for us as we move forward as adults, potentially future parents, what have you, is how can we do things differently then? Because as we develop more of an internal locus of control, we can choose to do things a little bit different, right? So something to think about there. And again, I want to kind of start off Thursday morning just with that question again. I want to give y'all some time to mull over it a little bit. How is locus of control connected to motivation? I want to also poll y'all really fast. Thursday, my goal is to dedicate our time together to reviewing for your first exam next week. And at first I was going to move it online because attendance had been abysmal, but today y'all made me happy. Would y'all rather do review in person or through Zoom? In person. Okay. So then what I need from y'all then to make Thursday effective, we're going to kind of go through, I'm going to make sure we allot enough time to each of the theories we've talked about. We're not going to be able to go in depth, but I need for y'all to come to me with the questions that you have. So what are things as you look back through your notes that you're like, hold on, this is really confusing to me. What doesn't make sense? I'm going to let y'all guide the review. So if we're only in here 15 minutes, we're only in here 15 minutes. But this is, I'm giving y'all agency over how we spend 70 minutes together on Thursday. Okay? All right, see y'all then.